No one listens to your shit.
Ooh!
Merry Christmas!
Hello, lovelies. I keep waiting for the penny to drop for everyone, for this sudden revelation of understanding and acceptance to spread through everyone. And it's incredibly frustrating being well versed in history and politics and viewing everything that's going on in the world and everyone's reaction to everything that's going on in the world, because we know what works and we know the kind of thing that works to deal with all the multitude of problems that we're facing, and yet people seem steadfastly determined not to do the things that work, or even to blame the things that work for the disasters that we've had in the past and the disasters that we're facing right now. And globally right now we're facing a great deal of problems, but also a great deal of opportunities, and this is particularly true of the United Kingdom at the moment. Yet despite knowing what works, we have anti-vaxxers who are a fucking plague, ironically enough, upon attempts to deal with COVID. We have people who deny that COVID is even a thing, or refuse to wear masks, or object to necessary measures for medical reasons on the grounds of some kind of misguided sense of liberty, even though these are all temporary and necessary health measures, and even actively and openly seek to defy these necessary health measures, such as mask wearing, lockdowns, all the rest of it, for no real reason that's really discernible, other than they don't want to, and then they construct this meringue-like confection of justification for just not wanting to. They disasterize it, and in this way it's no different to, say, feminist cultural critics or racial cultural critics who seek to take their own personal distaste for something and catastrophize it into some kind of world-threatening thing. It's exactly the same rationalization process going on. In America, we have people denying the results of an election, and while the opposite side some years ago, with greater justification, had some reservations, you didn't see anything like the level of denialism that's going on now back then. And in the midst of this global crisis, we have all these, what can we call them, marginalised grifters, finding increasingly small and irrelevant problems in the face of everything that's going on to try and attack and deal with. Is it that they're feeling isolated and cut off due to the lockdowns and the lack of travel, and that they only feel that they can maybe make some sort of difference on these fine-grained problems? Is that what's motivating them? Is that what's allowing them to justify their obsessions with irrelevant bullshit? I don't know, but it's irrelevant bullshit. Here in the UK, we have our own COVID denialists, anti-vaxxers, we have all of those problems, but we're also being pummeled by Brexit, which is apparently still pressing ahead despite the catastrophe that is ongoing. We're taking an economy that is going to be severely weakened already by COVID, and then kicking it while it's down by insisting on going through with Brexit at the same time. Indeed, we're getting a preview of the effects of Brexit right now, because due to our failure to get the COVID epidemic under control, we've become a pariah state, and the rest of Europe has closed its borders to us. It's almost like members of the EU had control over their borders the whole time, isn't it? As we're finding out to our cost. And yet, people are still pushing to go ahead with this, to wreck our country even more, to cut us off from mutual aid within this broader society, within this broader European and global society. You keep waiting for that penny to drop for any of these groups, any of these people, and it never does. And even people that I otherwise respect and don't necessarily think are full of shit are completely full of shit when it comes to COVID. And there's an impending economic crash. And again, we know what works to deal with these massive economic crashes, and that is massive public investment and welfare infrastructure. We know from looking back to the Great Depression and the New Deal in the United States that this is what works. Or ultimately World War II. It's a less than ideal solution, but people who will deny that FDR's reforms safeguarded the US economy, helped accelerate it out of the pit that it found itself in after the Great Depression, will say, no, it's World War II that did it. So it wasn't massive government spending, employment and investment. It was massive government intervention, spending and employment. You understand what you're saying there, do you? And yet people seem resistant. People seem to rewrite history, rewrite facts, not just in the modern day, but looking backwards, cherry-picking data, finding people from right-wing think tanks that go against the general international consensus. I mean, economics isn't really a science, and it's essentially voodoo, but even so, with hindsight, if you can get the degree of consensus that we have, then we know what works to deal with these kind of problems, and it's massive government spending and investment that redistributes cash, gives people employment, helps people get by until the economy is able to recover, kind of like putting a plaster cast on a broken leg. And we know this. It's not really contentious outside of lolbertarian far-right think tanks that this is what works. This is what has worked time and time again in history. And we have people already lining up to set their hostility against the Great Reset, or to incorporate it into their paranoid conspiracy theories, when really all it represents is an opportunity. We've seen that huge amounts of people are capable of working from home and maintaining productivity and all the rest of it, and it helps redress their work-life balance, saves them money, cuts down on pollution, all the rest of it. And we've seen that deliveries work as a way of getting groceries and other materials, and that also cuts down on carbon footprint because one journey delivers to an enormous number of people. So why shouldn't we take this opportunity and the necessity of massive public investment to turn things around, to be greener, more sustainable, a fairer society, even to bring in things like universal basic income, whose time has very much come? And yet, while there's resistance from certain aspects of the ruling classes and the moneyed classes that you'd expect, there is also resistance from the very people who stand to benefit the most in the longest term by massive public investment in education, sustainability, a greener economy, greener power, all of these things. Yet they're dead set against it. And you can't just wave your hand and say false consciousness. It's more than that. And yet simultaneously the people who want to make these positive changes seem fixated more upon these pointless little frivolities, whether a particular obscure sector of the economy is exactly racially proportional or gender proportional, rather than these broad sweeping things that would lift all ships and better everyone's life. And people still think this Great Reset idea is some kind of Marxist plot, when it isn't. It's a way to fast forward doing the things that we're going to have to do before they get to crisis level themselves, individually, outside of all this. I spend a lot of time hanging out with people who are futurists and who tend to be quite positive. I watch quite a lot of sense-making channels, even though I mostly find them infuriating, and yet that positivism, that idea that we can convince people, it seems increasingly laughable, just given how much resistance there is to things that are known, and the amount of not just fake news but fake history and narratives over facts, how much of that is going on. And it's been horrendous to see that happen to the left, which used to be able to say unironically that reality had a left-wing bias. Now nobody seems to care what's real or historical or what the best measures are, what works and what we know works. Everyone seems dead set on being the very opposite of pragmatic. And it's infuriating and it's depressing, and it's the closest thing I think you can experience to the kind of existential terror that Lovecraft spent so long writing about. And we have no more worlds to conquer. There is only one game in town, really, and that is neoliberal capitalism and corrupted plutocratic democracy. There are no new land masses that a population can move to try something different. Revolution is undesirable because it ends up killing a lot of people and destroying your infrastructure, and tends to get taken over by the very opposite of what you're trying to accomplish in any kind of revolution. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to try experiments. The only people that might possibly be able to are the very kind of libertarian plutocrats who fucked up the world already for everyone else. So even if they do manage to get some kind of seasteading project off the ground, it's just going to be a repeat of the hellhole they've made of everything else, just with a much higher level of personal wealth amongst the people that live there. It's beginning to look a lot like Shitmas. Zang.
Merry Christmas! Ho, 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 ho.